back for another episode. I'm sorry if I sound like Janice from Friends, super nasally. I am under the weather big time. Just gonna go ahead and push through this because it is Fantasy Football Championship week and we have so much to talk about. I am joined by Shovit. How are you doing, man, on 2 days before the biggest Sunday of fantasy football lives?
I'm doing great. You said Janet, and the first thing I thought I was like, "Oh my god, the classic Janet." So
100%.
accurate. But no, I'm doing great. I've got some good matchups this week. I'm looking to bring the title home in one of my leagues, and I just need my players to show up. I don't think there's many lineup changes. There's some injuries that we'll highlight on, but all in all, I feel pretty confident going into this week.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say I feel the same. I'm in the finals in my other league as well, but having to do these last second running back pivots with Pollard and Henry not playing,
Yeah.
and then I don't know, just that really kind of hinders my, I don't know, as confident as I was before heading into the matchup. But I think we should spend a little bit of time here after we do a little bit of a recap, just going through our matchups for our championship round so that we can make sure we put out the best possible lineup. But without further ado, Shovit, let's kick things off with water cooler talk. Thursday night football was last night. The Dallas Cowboys and the Tennessee Titans faced off in a game that for Tennessee, they really didn't have a lot to play for. They have a win or go home or win and in next situation next week against the Jaguars. So this game didn't have a lot of implications. So that's why Derrick Henry sat. Derrick Henry sitting was a big pivot last second, I guess change that most fantasy owners had to go through. And so for me included, I pivoted with just getting the backup for Henry, Hassan Haskins, just with the idea that it's such a run first offense. All they do is run the ball. Like they can't change a game script overnight for, when Henry's not playing, right? So I expected it to be run heavy, but the matchup wasn't great. Dallas is a great run defense. And so the fear was that, you don't know what you're getting with the backup. Can they use multiple backups? Because Henry's one of one, right? So there's not anybody that can really replicate what Derrick Henry does. And so I had limited options. I deployed Hassan Haskins. He ended up putting up 6.3 fantasy points. So it wasn't a complete dud, but one rumble into the end zone, and that would have totally changed the outlook. On the other side, I mean, I expected the Dallas Cowboys defense to really feast, right? Joshua Dobbs started a week after he'd been on the team. I
Right.
don't know what it is, but these guys that just come in and improvise, they did do a lot better than once they learn the playbook. Like maybe Baker Mayfield needs to keep getting traded and just improvise and keep playing and never learn playbooks because he's like such a playground quarterback and he can make things happen when he doesn't have to actually read
Yeah.
routes and read coverages. So,
Well, Josh
I
Dobbs is also like a very smart guy. Like he is
yeah,
a
incredibly smart.
engineer major, and so he's got probably an ability to pick up those playbooks a lot better than some of the other guys. So yeah, the Baker Mayfield is surprising, but Dobbs, yeah, he played. I thought he played really well too last
He
game.
played really well. I mean, we were texting back and forth. Some of these throws were
Yeah.
on the money. Robert Woods with the drop, Treylon Burks with the drop, like in big third downs too, right? He was getting the ball downfield. He was doing pretty much everything you would expect of him. They did a lot of good first down play actions because they're such a run first team that the Dallas was having 8-9 guys in the box at times, and so the play calling was there. Some of the most of the throws were there, but the receivers couldn't execute. And at the end of the day, I think the Cowboys just ended up being a little bit too much. Pollard didn't play. That was the other big fantasy maneuver that fantasy owners faced, and I had Pollard as well. So this was a big Thursday night matchup for me. That what could have been with Henry and Pollard versus Haskins and nobody for me. So it was wild, but for Cowboys fans and for fantasy owners on that side, man, if you started Dalton Schultz, and we talked about him last week, show that you're like, man, at this point, I just kind of don't like it. And who's to blame you? He'd been so underperforming, and then all of a sudden he comes out here and puts up a 2-touchdown performance and has the game of his life. So somebody that trusted Dalton Schultz in this situation, again, do you call them smart or do you call them, hey, at that point you probably should have pivoted, you just kind of lucked out? Because he ended up having a fantastic game, probably going to end up being tight end 1 or 2 on the week. And then CeeDee Lamb was the other guy that absolutely kind of came off and had a great game. So Zeke ended up finding the end zone. I know that helped people who had Zeke, but he didn't have a great game. The Titans front was really good at stopping the run. But CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz. CeeDee Lamb you start, but show it. Dalton Schultz,
No.
talk me through people that started him, and were they smart or were was that just stupid luck?
I mean, at this point with the tight end position, like it's so hard to find a replacement for Dalton Schultz. So maybe you just had to deploy Dalton Schultz, and if you even made it to the playoffs because your other or finals because of your other guys are have been performing, and Dalton Schultz was the only guy that didn't perform in the playoffs, then I guess it makes sense. But yeah, I mean, he literally just came out of nowhere, and that last touchdown, I was like, he did what I feel like he should have done every single game is that he was being guarded by a 5'11" guy, and he's six
Yep.
foot five. He's got 6 inches on this guy. Dak Prescott was like evading the rush. He just throws it up where only Schultz could get it, and he got the touchdown by just jumping over the guy and getting the catch. And so they've just not been utilizing him in that sense. But this was just a weird game, I think, for the Cowboys altogether. That you didn't see like great run schemes for them. And you saw Dak Prescott throw 2 interceptions. He now has as much interceptions as Derek Carr does, who is getting benched next week. So Dak Prescott needs to step it up. But I think it's got to be fluky for Dalton Schultz to have this type of game. You expect it from him. You just haven't seen that kind. So yeah, I'm gonna call it luck. I'm gonna call it. You
Yeah.
started Dalton Schultz and you got those 2 touchdowns, and you're happy with the points, but that is not what you expected from Dalton Schultz for sure.
Yeah, the Titans defense had been really, really friendly to opposing receivers, right? I mean, tight ends were having decent days, but it wasn't as good of a mismatch or, a good opportunity to play as receivers are. So, yeah, it's not like the matchup dictated it. Again, the Cowboys, for the Tennessee side, they didn't have a ton to play for, and you knew with the Cowboys already resting Pollard. Again, it didn't seem like the type of game that their studs really necessarily needed to go off or even really anything needed to happen for them for that matter of fact. But yeah, 7 catches, 56 yards, 2 scores. Yeah, and again, they used him the way they should. Throw him those jump balls. He's a mismatch. Most tight ends are tight ends because they're mismatches, right? So like utilize them that way. It just I don't know why does it seem like a no brainer to us idiots, and then the coaches don't know how to deploy and use their guys properly. But the last thing I'll say before we move on is the Dak Prescott situation. Like he had 2 interceptions, and I'm really hard on Dak too because I think he's a little bit overrated. One of them was absolutely his fault. I mean, an out route that he just, they
Yeah.
were playing a zone coverage and the cornerback was sitting right there in the out. And then the other one was, I think it was like tipped right off his receiver's shoulders or something like that. I can't remember, but that one wasn't his fault. So that's the thing with Dak, though, right? Either he's super good against really bad teams and it's like 330 through the air, 3 scores, he has a phenomenal game against really, really good opponents and better matchups. A lot of times it's, they're relying more on their run game or he's dumping off to Pollard and Pollard's having to do things after the catch. And so like, I'm still not completely terrified facing Dak in the playoffs. And so even if this team makes the playoffs right now, the fear for the Cowboys was how vaunting their defense and pass rush was. And here you have Tennessee deploying a couple of backup offensive linemen. And the minute you block Micah Parsons, all of a sudden their defense is like so sus. Like the cornerbacks are giving up yards to Woods, and like Woods was open. He just wasn't
Yeah.
catching balls, right? Woods was open. Burks was open. So the defense that is so scary when they can generate pressure, when they can't, it's like the complete opposite. They're like, I would love to throw against this defense. So it's weird, man. We talk about it from week to week with the NFL. It's like, who's the team that's like from start to finish, like terrifying, And, for me, obviously the Eagles, even though they've had certain road bumps themselves, and then the Chiefs on the other side, in my opinion. But again, that's why this year as a Vikings fan, it feels so wide open because every team, while at times has like the highest of highs, those same teams come back down to earth so drastically and dramatically that you're like, oh, then, on any given week, you can beat them. So it's been a wild year in the NFL. But this game, obviously, Dallas was favored. They covered the spread. They win the game outright. They take care of business, and they still have an opportunity to win the East. They still have an outside chance to win the East and claim the first round bye. So a lot of things would have to go right for them. Tennessee now falls, but it doesn't matter for them for this game. Again, they have a win or go home situation against the Jags for the division next week. That's going to be a great matchup. That's it for Thursday night recap. Let's jump into the injuries that are going to be impacting your fantasy lineups heading into Sunday. Players that are officially listed as out. Greg Dulcich is out for Denver. He had been a nice tight end option anytime Russell Wilson has been playing. Wilson's back. Dulcich is out. So there goes that. Deebo Samuel was getting practice time this week, so there was thoughts that maybe he could play. But again, They don't necessarily need to push for him to play because, yes, the best thing that could happen for them is they have an outside chance to get the 2 seed over the Vikings. But 3 versus 2 to risk your star wide receiver, probably not worth it. So he's officially going to be out this week. Jalen Hurts practiced, and he actually looked better than they expected him to, but he is listed as doubtful, so I'm not expecting him to play. It is going to be Gardner Minshew. Lamar Jackson is also out again. There have been rumblings now that, based on the interviews that I heard from Harbaugh, that the issue is more so Lamar Jackson is holding out a little bit in that he could play when push comes to shove. Like if this was week 1 of the playoffs or the wild card week, he would probably play. But because he hasn't gotten that big contract yet, he's kind of using that as leverage. So it's a weird in-season tactic because it's like you're kind of fucking over the team that you ultimately want to pay you the big bucks, right? In the middle of the season, like when playoff time is coming. So it's a weird strategy. I don't know if it'll pay off for him, but even if on the outside chance the Ravens don't re-sign Lamar Jackson, there's going to be plenty of teams that are going to be like thirsting and chomping at the bit for him. So I'm not really worried about that. For the Arizona Cardinals, Colt McCoy was slated to start again in lieu of Trace McSorley, but concussion, and he is out. But you would have thought McSorley would have been starting. Nope, they are going to start 4th-string quarterback David Blau. So, again, outside of James Conner, I don't know who the hell you're going to want to start in that matchup. And then for the Commanders, Antonio Gibson is out, and that is big in the impact of Brian Robinson and the other players in that game that we'll talk about. And Tua's concussion, he is out as well. Teddy Bridgewater gets the start there. Real quick, players that are questionable. Tyler Lockett is questionable. He had a good week of practice. Pete Carroll says he's going to play, but the fear with Lockett is he has re-aggravating injuries all the time. He's so injury prone. So he could, see the playing time and then get hurt again, and you don't want that in the finals. So in this matchup, I kind of don't like Lockett. So if you have Lockett, pivot away, even though it looks like he's going to play. DeAndre Hopkins also popped up on the injury report with a knee injury. Is that related to the fact that there's a 4th-string quarterback going to be playing and Hopkins needs to be like, you know what? I don't need to risk my future for this bullshit, so I'm just going to have an injury and not play. That is going to matter because right now I have Hopkins in my starting lineup, and now I'm worried just because they named David Blau as a starter. I'm like, dude, Hopkins might not play. So they have nothing to play for. So Hopkins is somebody you want to look out for as well. Ramondre Stevenson was listed as questionable. He's probably going to play for the Patriots. So you're going to deploy him. The one thing of note there is Damian Harris, surprisingly, is also listed as active. So it looks like Harris is back for them. So hopefully for my sake, because I'm playing against Stevenson, Harris gets to eat into some of Stevenson's carries. Players that will play. Ken Walker III is going to play. Joey Bosa for the Chargers is officially going to play. Hopefully he can change that defense around. Austin Eckler just giving us weird vibes. Obviously he's going to play, man. He gives a shit about fantasy, so he's going to play. James Conner for the Cardinals, as of now, is listed as playing. The only reason why I think he would play, despite the Cardinals not playing for anything in the whole Hopkins situation, I think Conner's in a contract year or something like that, so maybe he wants to continue to pad his stats, make sure they re-sign him. Brandon Cooks, off the injury report, he's going to play. Jerry Jeudy is one of the few pass catchers available, going to play for Denver. Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones both going to play. Damian Harris, already talked about it. He's in. A.J. Brown and Miles Sanders, who are listed on the injury report, they are good to go. So a lot of big names that are going to play, not a ton of huge names that are officially listed as out. I think the biggest out for fantasy football this week already happened on Thursday night. Like the Pollard and Henry were probably the 2 biggest players that were going to impact your fantasy lineup. So that is all I have for injury. Shobit, did I miss anybody?
I think you got most of it. Questionable also is going to be Christian Watson. I think he's dealing with a hip injury. I don't remember off the top of my head, but Christian Watson is questionable. So he's probably in your lineups and some guy you need to definitely look into. Maybe look at Lazard if Christian Watson's out to pick up Lazard and start him instead if you have 4-10 flexes that you need to start with something.
Yeah, it's a great matchup against Minnesota. I would know. So yeah, that's definitely. I mean, if Watson is out, you're wanting to play one of the other receivers, even Dobbs or Lazard, maybe both of them. So that's it for injury. Shove-it. Let's get it kicked off with the rundown. First game on the board, the Arizona Cardinals and David Blau at the helm, going to travel to Atlanta to take on Desmond Ridder and the Falcons. Man, have we reached the end of the season or what? David Blau versus Desmond Ridder. Atlanta at home, Desmond Ridder favored by 4.5 points over under 42.5. Like I said, David Blau getting his first first start for Arizona. Both teams are officially eliminated for the playoffs, so there's really not much to play for outside of, building for 2023. For the Falcons side, I feel great about building for 2023 and how that's going to impact fantasy this week. Tyler Algier has been a stud, man, and he gets a great matchup against Arizona. I love him this week. I like him better than a lot of, better named running backs probably. And if we, get to them, I'll definitely name them off. Drake London's been really, really good with Ritter. The touchdown hasn't been there, but the volume and the targets and the receptions are there. So I think that's going to continue to trend upwards as they build chemistry. And Arizona again sucks. So I like that matchup. On the Arizona side, James Conner, obviously he's the workhorse there. So unless he's not playing, he's going to get 90% of the touches and the snaps at the running back position. Now with David Blau, I liked Hopkins still with McCoy. I hated him with McSorley because McSorley was run first. David Blau is not a run first guy. He also is a drop back passer. So I almost didn't hate Hopkins still, but now with the Hopkins injury popping up on Thursday here, I am a little concerned there. So that's something to monitor. If Hopkins goes, I still think you play him because I don't imagine DeAndre Hopkins agreeing to play, but then half-assing it, right? Like I think he's pretty much a competitor. So I think if he's going to be out there, he's going to play. And Blau, it's your first start for Arizona. You're typically going to look to the guy that's the best player on the field. So I still do like it. But on the Falcons side, I love Algier. I love London. So both of those guys, I feel pretty comfortable starting this week in fantasy finals if you have them. But Atlanta, 4.5 points. That is a lot of points to give Desmond Ritter, despite it being David Blau. This game could get pretty close. Arizona could upset the Falcons.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about draft picks, and where these teams are. But I always feel like instead of tanking, you really need to take that win to the next season. I think there's more value in that personally. You might not agree, but I just feel like from a coaching standpoint, like they definitely both teams need to try to win this game as they are both out of the playoffs, like you mentioned. All right. That takes us to the Chicago Bears at Detroit Lions. Detroit is favored by 6 points. The over-under is at 43 points here. Let's start with fantasy on the Lions side. So one of the guys who lost in the fantasy playoffs last week decided to go out and pick up Jared Goff on waivers. And I don't know why he did that. I feel like there's some collusion there going on. But nonetheless, the point is Jared Goff is in a very favorable matchup against the Chicago Bears. If he's on your waivers and you're kind of struggling, figuring out, you've got some Jalen Hurts injuries that you're dealing with, go out and see if Jared Goff is available. If he is, he's definitely a streamable start in the finals here this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to continue to get a start. DeAndre Swift, he is in a favorable matchup. That's why he gets the start. He is touchdown dependent, but I think that you could roll the dice on DeAndre Swift this week against the Bears, whose run defense isn't that great. And then lastly, DJ Chark, who has been kind of up and coming the last 3-4 weeks. If you've got, I'm in a league with 2 wide receivers and 2 flex positions, and given that Watson is going to be injured for me, DJ Chark is a guy that I could potentially see about rolling him in. He could definitely fill that wide receiver 4 as far as fantasy goes this week. So DJ Chark is a streamable start as well. But I still think that Jameson Williams could also have that breakout game. He's more of a riskier play than I think DJ Chark is. But Jameson Williams, he had that 1 touchdown. I think it was against the Vikings, if I'm not mistaken. But Jameson Williams is a guy that could break out, and this is a better week than this week against the Bears to do that. On the Bears side, Justin Fields is the guy you're rolling with. Fields hasn't been performing into that top 10 wide quarterback spot in fantasy that you wanted in the playoffs, especially. But if you've gotten here and Justin Fields is there, you're going to start him. He had a great game against the Lions a couple of weeks back. Same thing with Cole Kmet. He also had a really good game against the Lions. I think he is a good start here from the tight end position. And David Montgomery, last week we talked about how the Lions rush defense is pretty good last 5 games, but they didn't show up against the Carolina Panthers. So you want to kind of take that momentum of the running game, and David Montgomery is going to be a start as well for the Bears and your fantasy team as well. But should be NFC North matchup. Lions, I think, are still in the hunt of playoffs, so there's something to fight for them. The Bears, not so much to fight for, except for next year's morale. But I expect the Lions to win this game. 6 points against the Bears. Yeah, I think they will cover that spread.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because like you said, the Lions' run defense had been phenomenal, and then all of a sudden last week you have both Foreman and Hubbard have like fantastic games going off against them. But the good thing is, despite the Lions being a good run defense and then being susceptible last week, Bears come in as an amazing run offense, right? That's predominantly what their offense is. So right at the minute you have Justin Fields back there with read options, and the fact that the defenses have to make sure that Fields doesn't beat them, because if he's outside the corner, he's gone, right? Montgomery, not as much. So I think that bodes well for Montgomery. But the one thing to watch out for, again, Herbert came off the IR last week, saw a little
True.
bit of snaps.
Yep.
They do like him a lot, and he's younger. And he hasn't been playing for a while. So they probably want to get him ramped back up. But again, I don't know. It's the end of the season. We'll really see what happens. But I do still think it's a good matchup for the running game. In Arrowhead, the Chiefs are hosting the Denver Broncos. Kansas City is favored by 12.5 points over under 45. This is the first game for the Denver Broncos since Nathaniel Hackett has officially gotten fired, and the Chiefs are still trying to get that first seed. So they play Denver. Is a favorable matchup. The Bills play the Bengals on Monday Night Football, which we'll get to. So there's a chance that the Bengals beat the Bills. The Chiefs could lock up that number one seed, or at least hold the number one seed heading into the final week. Russell Wilson had his best game of the season against the Chiefs a couple weeks back before he ended up getting concussed. So I don't know what to do with that information, to be honest, because that was with Hackett. Hackett sucks. Hackett's gone. So now, like, what's going to happen? The only real guy on the Broncos side I feel comfortable starting is Jerry Jeudy, just because Dolchich is out. They're going to have to throw. They're probably going to play from behind against the Chiefs. And Jeudy has been good. He's been good. He gets open. He gets separation. He runs really crisp routes. So I feel comfortable with Jeudy, especially on a lot of third downs and stuff like that. Latavius Murray, it's a weird situation. One week he gets like 25 carries. The next week their game script, they're kind of out of it. He does love to find the end zone. Again, this is a game where the Chiefs are still going to be able to score points despite Denver's good defense giving up 51 points to the Rams. So I think Denver is going to have to push tempo. They're going to have to try to score, and there is going to be points to be had. So I think Latavius could get into the end zone, but we saw Chase Edmonds get into the mix a little bit more than last week. And so now it's Edmonds, Murray, and even Marlon Mack. So they're all kind of in the fold. So I don't love that for Latavius' sake. But again, if there's one thing that we know about Latavius, he somehow finds a way to still be productive. So that's what I'm looking for on Denver side. Obviously, Kelsey, Patrick Mahomes, obvious. I still lean Jerick McKinnon over Pacheco just because of the matchup. I think Denver's got a better run defense. And if they need to throw the football, they've been loving dumping the ball off to McKinnon. Juju is flexible, but I think there's better options just because of the matchup as well. So this game could get out of hand. Again, Denver has been bad. They've yet to really show that they can be good, except that little glimpse against the Chiefs. So is that going to repeat itself, or is this a completely revamped team now that Nathaniel Hackett's gone? I don't know. Hard to predict when a coach gets fired. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kansas City's defense, pass defense, has been kind of sus against wide receivers as well. So I like that Jerry Jeudy start for the Broncos this week for sure. All right, moving on forward, we have the Miami Dolphins going to Boston, where they play the New England Patriots. The Patriots are favored by 2 points. The over-under is at 41 points here. So no Tua, like we talked about, he self-reported his concussion. So Teddy Bridgewater is getting the start, which gives me a little bit of fear as far as the Dolphins receivers are concerned. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, you're probably still going to start them, but you've got to temper your expectations knowing that Bridgewater is the guy that's there. Not that Bridgewater is terrible. I just feel like there's just a lot more dump offs, and I just don't see like deep bombs to Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill may still get it based off of volume as well. So you're still going to start those guys, but I would stay away from anyone else, including Mostert or Wilson. The Patriots' run defense is stringent, and they are tough to run against. So I think that these two guys are not going to warrant a start this week from the Dolphins standpoint. And on the Patriots side, we have to monitor Stevenson. He was limited in Thursday practice, like you mentioned, due to the ankle injury, but he's expected to be available on Sunday. I don't think that Damian Harris being available will hinder too much as far as Stevenson. Harris will probably get some carries here and there, but nothing to warrant Stevenson not being able to get the carries to get you the fantasy points that you need to win this week. And then because Teddy Bridgewater is getting started and because of the run defense from the Patriots, I do like the Patriots' defense and special teams against the Dolphins this week. I know the Dolphins are explosive, but they're a different team with Teddy Bridgewater as opposed to Tua when he's not concussed. So therefore, I like the Patriots' defense for a streamable start this week as well.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I'm playing against Stevenson, and I got myself a little bit more excited about it. Stevenson's coming off ankle injury, right? He's been limited. Harris is officially off of the injury report, and so maybe, gosh, just maybe they try to work Harris more into the fold. Even though Stevenson's proven to be the better running back, but he is in fact the better running back. It's week 17, and he's hobbly a little bit. So maybe for the sake of the future, they try to use Harris a little bit more. I don't know. I'm just trying to manifest it for myself for the finals.
I think it's possible. I think that if Stevenson's looking he's going to go out there, he's going to get the start, and he's not looking as explosive as he needs to be, then Harris might come in and scoop up all of those carries, and there goes your Stevenson days. But I mean, you're still going to bank on the RB1 to kind of perform, and it's hard not to start Stevenson because
Yeah,
the upside is definitely there.
yeah, for sure. The New York Giants are hosting the Indianapolis Colts this week in New York. Giants are favored by 5.5 over under 39 points. The New York Giants win, and they are in the playoffs, so they have a lot to play for. The Colts currently hold the 5th overall draft spot, so they have a lot to play for on the opposite side. So it's interesting matchup. Obviously, again, nobody likes to tank, but the Colts, seeing how bad Nick Foles was last week, said, you know what, we want to do this again. So they said, Nick Foles is our starter without a doubt. They loved what they saw. They're like, we're going to lose. We're going to get into the top 5. So Nick Foles is starting. On the Giants side, though, Daniel Jones has been a nice streaming option. I started him last week. It was a better matchup, obviously, and he ended up having, I think, 20-plus fantasy points. So he was pretty good. Indianapolis is not as good of a matchup, but I still like it because they have so much to play for, and they don't have quite as much to play for. And Jones provides value with his legs. I think that's the biggest thing for him. And honestly, if I'm looking at matchups, I'd play him over like Brock Purdy, even though Brock Purdy plays Vegas. I just think, he doesn't have to do more with what he's given. He can do less, and Jones kind of has to do more. But on the other side, Barkley, obviously you'll play him. Wide receiver side, it's still not clear. I mean, Isaiah Hodgins looks like he's emerged. He seems to have like the better or the best playmaking ability out of the three of them. Richie James seems to be more like the slot, the underneath, kind of the twitchy guy. And then Slayton, they throw bombs to, and sometimes like third down situations, kind of more Mr. Reliable. So I don't know. There's really not one guy that stands out there. Pick your poison if you're really wanting to start one of those guys. I personally wouldn't. Zach Moss on the cold side, he gets so much volume. And I read a report that the reason that the whole Deion Jackson thing isn't happening is Deion Jackson got mad about the amount of playing time he was getting. So now he's in the doghouse because he complained about it. So that's why they're running Zach Moss to the ground, like 25 carries. The dude is not that good. And I feel like a lot of people see that he's not that good, but it is Jeff Saturday. Like the whole situation is like, we're trying to lose. Deion Jackson's out there like trying to win, gain every yard. Zach Moss is just he is what he is. And Jeff Saturday's like, that's what we want on the field. We want Nick Foles and we want Zach Moss. So I guess, because of volume, you still feel good starting Zach Moss. I mean, if you're getting 20-plus carries as a running back, it's hard not to start you in fantasy. From the receiving side, still feel most comfortable with Michael Pittman Jr. But I don't know. The Colts are so weird this year. I don't really know what to expect, but if I have to pick one of their receivers, it's Michael Pittman still.
Yeah, for sure. Man, I am actually playing the Giants defense this week. They're starting for me as of right now. And so I like that matchup with Nick Foles as the quarterback there.
Yeah, with how bad he looked last week, I mean,
Yeah.
you would think a week later he'd look a little bit better, but he looked like a guy like how we talked about Deshaun Watson looked rusty. Nick Foles literally looked like he hadn't picked up a football since the last time he won a Super Bowl. Like it looked that bad.
Right. Hopefully he didn't get his warm up in that last week, and then this is the week he throws 7 touchdowns.
Goes
or
off.
something.
He's back to Nick Foles. Yeah.
All right. Next up, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles who will host the New Orleans Saints, and the line is at 5.5, favored by Philadelphia Eagles. The over/under is at 41.5. So on the Saints side, who are you going to start? So you're banking on Kamara. You're probably going to start Kamara if you have him in the finals. You're banking on his receptions this week. Philadelphia is susceptible to allowing running backs to have receptions, so therefore deploy Kamara. Olave is questionable to play, so I downgrade him to a flex spot if he does decide to play. Shaheed has been coming off and performing well since week 12. So 26.1% of the team air yards. He runs route on 78.6% of passing plays. And he's second in yards per route, only behind Tyreek Hill. So Shaheed, if you look at ESPN's projections, you're going to see that he's listed lower than Olave. But if Olave doesn't play, deploy Shaheed. I see that if you have a flex spot that you need a receiver, then Shaheed is definitely a good play. But the difficulty in all of this is that he does have a tough matchup versus Darius Slay and James Bradbury, whose QBR rating against them are like below 60 for each of those guys. So it's going to be tough matchup. But the ball's it's got to get thrown. If you're playing the Eagles, they're probably going to score points, and you got to be able to air it out. So I like Shaheed's chances as well. And then Taysom Hill, who's listed as a tight end, but he runs the ball to get touchdowns. So it's just a sweet spot as far as the being able to deploy him in that tight end position. So you're still going to deploy Taysom Hill this week in hopes that he's just able to get to the end zone and just be utilized in that offense like he has been. On the Eagle side, so no Jalen Hurts, he's doubtful. So Minshew mania. However, the Saints are 8th in allowing fantasy points per game. They're first in success rate per drop back, which puts Minshew in the quarterback 2 category. I don't think that he is going to get a sure start, but they've got enough firepower. They've got enough options as far as receivers goes that he could have a good game. But you definitely have to temper expectations because Saints pass defense is pretty good. Miles Sanders, he might have to wear a knee brace for the first time. That shouldn't hinder too much, but the good thing for Miles Sanders is the Saints are allowed 4.5 yards per carry, so should still be a good start for Miles Sanders owners. Obviously, Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, you're going to start them. And lastly, Dallas Goedert. He's playing against the no-fly zone defense of the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are first in catch rate, first in receiving yards per game, and first in fantasy points allowed to tight ends. And when I say first, that's like the best, not first in like the most points allowed. So they're the best as far as guarding, playing defense on the tight end. So Dallas Goedert, I think at this point it's so hard to find another tight end to take his position. But if you can, you will. If you most likely you won't be able to, and you're still going to be starting Dallas Goedert. But that's where you have to think about your projections, and it's going to be lower because Dallas Goedert has a tough matchup. But all in all, I think the Eagles, they need to win this game. The Cowboys are knocking on that front number 1 spot in the NFC East, so they're going to do what they can to win this game. Even though Jalen Hurts isn't playing, 5.5 spread, that will be tough to cover, but I think that they should win. I can't say one way or other if they will cover that spread or not. I think it's tough. 5.5 makes it a little bit tough with Gardner Minshew as a quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. Again, the Saints, they're not great, and their offense is so lackluster, but their defense has been pretty good as of late. They don't give up explosive plays. They don't give up a ton of points either. So, I agree with you on pretty much everything you said there, to be honest. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are playing the Carolina Panthers. This is a big game. The Buccaneers win, and they win the division, the South. The Panthers need to win to keep their hopes alive. They have to win this week, and then they have to either win next week or hope Tampa Bay loses next week. So there are big playoff implications here. Panthers have no J.C. Horn at cornerback this week, so that is going to bode well for Carolina's passing game. Brady, Fournette, Godwin, Evans. I mean, Brady at this point, he it's not, the same pretty Brady that it used to be, but he's still better than, like Aaron Rodgers, even though the matchup is a little bit worse for Brady this week than it is for Rodgers. Brady's at least, throwing a couple of touchdown passes. Fournette, you liked his usage a little bit more last week, relative to what it's been like the last 4 or 5 weeks. So I think he's trending better in terms of him versus White, that whole dilemma all year. Godwin, you have to start because of the volume. Mike Evans, I keep saying this is the week he's going to score a touchdown. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 4. No J.C. Horn. The matchup is there. It's right there for their taking. But I don't know, like you and I talked about, they have the Brady and Evans, that matchup or that chemistry just kind of lost a step, So I don't really know what to make of Evans. I'm personally, after a guy hasn't scored for 10 weeks, you could say, oh, he's due. But in my championship matchup, I'm going to try to look elsewhere if I can. And if Evans goes off, then oh shit, like 9 weeks, 1 week out of the 9 weeks he goes off, it ends up being the finals. I can't play that risk game on my end. I don't love the matchup on the Panther side in the running game for Foreman or Chuba duo, but I didn't love the matchup against Detroit, and they went off. And it seems like they're really, really set on running the football. That's kind of their identity. So just because of the fact that they will run the football, like there's probably going to be 30 combined carries between the two of those guys at least. it's hard not to start. Again, volume is the name of the game. Sometimes the volume isn't pretty. It's, it's very inefficient. But we have you have me, starting Hassan Haskins last night when I know Foreman's probably going to get 18 to 20 touches. So, if I have to pick a guy, it's still Foreman, just because he still gets more touches, even though Chuba has a little bit more pass catching ability and is a little bit more explosive. But I still take Foreman in that one. And then the receivers. I mean, Moore had a nice game last week, but it is Tampa Bay. He's going to go up against probably Carlton Davis. And again, they're a run-first team. So, it seems like DJ Moore would be the guy that has a big game, a bad game, big game, bad game, kind of boom bust. And this seems like a bust time. So, again, fantasy finals are on the line, guys. You have to start people that, it's like I was thinking about it earlier. What are like 5 categories I could create for myself as like I need to check all 5 of these boxes off to be able to basically full send deploy this guy. 4 out of the 5 boxes checked. Okay, I feel pretty good. 3 out of 5, it's 50-50. 2 out of 5, like I need to create my own categories. And obviously everybody can do that for themselves, but there are some categories that are more important, right? Like, okay, what's the fantasy matchup ranking? What's the opposing defense against this position, right? What is the offense that you play on, efficiency or EPA, yards per play, explosive rate, things like that. So like whatever those 5 characteristics are, you want to make sure that you analyze it that way. And, we talk about start your studs. And I know that's like a pretty common saying, but, there's been big evidence last week and the week before, the studs that you started putting up dud numbers. So sometimes in the finals, when it all comes down to it, you have to kind of roll the dice. And, that's where the tough decisions are to be made. So for the Panthers side, nobody on the receiving core. Again, if you're starting a running back, start Foreman. I still think the Buccaneers are going to win the division and win this game. They're going to luck into the playoffs, and they're probably going to upset the Cowboys in the first round.
They just need to play like they play in the last 2 minutes of games throughout the whole
Exactly.
game, and then they'll be a lot better. But I think you're right with the Evans situation. I think you definitely have to look at the matchups, and if you have a guy like, I don't know, like Zay Jones on your team, or even some
it's a great one. Zay Jones is a great one.
Right. He would get a start over Mike Evans, maybe even a guy from the Packers.
I'd start George Pickens. I'd start George Pickens over Mike Evans this week. Mike Evans is going so far down the totem pole at this point that I don't know, man. And it's so weird because that guy has been as consistent as consistency comes for fantasy, for scoring touchdowns, for 1,000-yard seasons, but it's just not there for whatever reason this year. And you can't risk it in the final week when you probably, have drive yourself crazy starting him over and over and over and over again, expecting that touchdown spree is finally going to come, and it hasn't been there. So to expect it to happen this week is asinine. If it happens and you put him on your bench, you live with that because he hasn't been doing it. There's just no reason to start him.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So next up, we've got the Cleveland Browns at Washington to face the Commanders. Washington is favored by 2.5 points. Over under is at 40.5. Carson Wentz will get the start in this game. So that should be,
I hate it. I think it's just such a stupid decision. Why are they doing this?
I'm not sure. Maybe they're just trying to see for like the last 2 weeks what Carson Wentz can do before they decide, okay, this is it. We need to move on. Just like the Colts did, they moved on. Eagles moved on. So maybe they need that one last during the game to figure that out, which is really crazy. But
it's like the X that'll never go away. Like just continues to just be. Maybe there's something there still. Have I sucked this lemon dry? No, there's a little bit of drops left. Like, no, dude, it's over. And like, Taylor Heineke, he's not the quarterback of the future. I think that's why it's so easy to pivot away from him. But it's so shitty that a guy that's basically got you here. I know their defense has been good, whatever, everything, but like he's still the guy quarterbacking this team, right? And he got you here. And now 2 weeks before the playoffs, when you need to win out, get help, like he's the guy that's got you here. And all of a sudden you're like, all right, we're going to go back to Wentz. Like, I don't know. Ron Rivera is such a great coach. I think he's a really, really good players coach. You saw the whole video about the Pro Bowl crap and all this stuff. But like, to me, this is such a weird move unless they truly, truly think Wentz is that much better. But I just don't think that. I do not think that.
Now we've seen enough from Wentz in the Colts days to know that like that whole trade was just I don't know why they even did that. But when Wentz is on the field, the receivers, we definitely need to talk about that. So Terry McLaurin is not favored with Wentz. They just don't have that chemistry. And when Wentz has been playing, he hasn't had great numbers as opposed to when Heineke's starting. Then Terry McLaurin has great volume and targets. And so that is going to definitely, if you have Terry McLaurin, and you have to think about that before you decide to start him. Dotson in the past couple of weeks is seeing more red zone targets, 50% end zone targets since week 13, which makes him an intriguing flex play. And the guy that Carson Wentz loved the most when he was there was Curtis Samuel. Now, at this point in fantasy finals, you're probably not going to start Curtis Samuel, but you would also consider shying away from starting Terry McLaurin if he's there on your flex spot. And then Brian Robinson. So no Gibson, Robinson to the moon. I mean, this guy should get all the carries against the Cleveland Browns. They should be Brian Robinson. He's a guy that next year could be a running back one that you go and draft in the first week first round of draft.
First round.
And first round of drafting. And so Brian Robinson is a full send if no Gibson. And on the Browns side, so Nick Chubb hasn't been playing well since Deshaun Watson has been kind of has been the starter. Maybe they're just not getting enough conversions on third downs, but his fantasy stats are not something that you want to see from your RB1. So since week 11th, they're 24th in explosive run. The good thing about this whole matchup with the Browns is that they're playing the Commanders, who are 24th in explosive run rate allowed and 17 in rushing yards per game. So Nick Chubb is in a favorable matchup against Commanders. So I have him as RB2 this week as far as the position, not RB like the second best running back, but just on your team, RB2. Amari Cooper is a interesting flex play. He's playing against Kendra Fuller, who allows 91.9 passer rating, and Benjamin St-Juste, who allows 97.9 passer rating. So this all boils down to Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson hasn't played well. So if he can kind of figure things out, play a little bit better against this Commanders defense that's not really stepping up like they did in the first half of the season, then Amari Cooper is a good play. In that same kind of conversation with Amari Cooper and the matchups that he has, Donovan Peoples-Jones is also flex wide receiver 4 category in leagues that have 2 flex spots. And then on the tight end side, for the Browns, David Njoku. I expect him to have a bounce back game this week. I think he is a guy that you want to go ahead and start. He had a touchdown that was in the red zone that he dropped, and that would have inflated his fantasy numbers, but he didn't get that catch. It was cold outside. Even though he was out there without a shirt on, kind of warming up in 9-degree weather, he was still not warmed up to get that catch. And on Twitter, it was like, go put on a shirt and go catch the ball. Like that's kind of like, it's very funny when you go out and put out a show like that, but you don't deliver.
But, yeah.
I think, but you still start David Njoku. I think that he has, like I said, a bounce back game this week. But yeah, Washington is favored. They do have enough. I think even with Carson Wentz getting the start, I think they have enough firepower as far as if Brian Robinson can get into the end zone, if they can kind of use the run game to complement their passing game, I think they do come out with a win against the Browns, where they're just not looking as good and their defense isn't great either. So I think Commanders get a win in this one.
Yeah, it should be a big running game. Defense running. Commanders, they look good. I hope Carson Wentz isn't what everybody knows he already is. Like, if he just imagine this game, comes down to the wire and Carson Wentz gets a strip sack fumble to lose the game or something, right? Like something very Carson Wentz. Like, I mean, like, as Ron Rivera, how do you live with yourself knowing that that's what the results have been for so long, and you're still hoping to get a different outcome? I don't know. It's insanity is what it is. The Houston Texans continue to fight hard despite having only won one game this year, or 2 games this year now. They are hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars on the road, only favored by 3 points, over under 43. Why are they only favored by 3 points in Houston? Well, Houston's playing hard, and the Jags' Achilles heel has been the Houston Texans. They've lost 9 in a row to Houston. Houston sucks at everything in football, but the one thing they do well, they beat the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Houston's going to be looking for their 10th straight victory against them. For the Jags, the result of this game, doesn't really matter, because again, like I mentioned earlier, they're going to play the Tennessee Titans next week for the division, for whoever's going to win to make the playoffs. So this game, again, ultimately is just a warm-up, practice, whatever you want to call it. But the Jags have come out and said they still want to win. They want to build that that momentum heading into next week's win and in situation. So Trevor Lawrence has been phenomenal. He's really, really progressed. I love what I see. He's going to jump into a top 10 quarterback in fantasy probably moving forward every season. So I really like him. He becomes kind of matchup proof lately. So to me, you start Trevor Lawrence. ETN should have a nice game. Evan Ingram will have to be started. You just cannot not start Evan Ingram, and you have to live with the results if he does bad, but he just hasn't really been doing bad. So I think at this point, not starting him is stupider than starting him. That's that for Evan Ingram. And then the Jones and Kirk situation, right? I mean, Christian Kirk came onto the scene early. Zay Jones has been really, really good as of late. I mean, you look at their last 5 weeks in targets, you're looking at Jones 14, 7, 12, 8, but then he had a 4. And then you look at Kirk, he's got 9, 8, 7, 10, 6. So pretty consistent off the board. The only thing is Zay Jones has had a couple of bigger boom weeks than Kirk has had. So I don't know. You really play the odds. You play your matchups. If you're in a situation where you need a floor, maybe Kirk's the guy. If you're in a situation where you need a guy to potentially boom, maybe Jones is the guy. So either way, I think one of those two, maybe both of them have a pretty solid game. But again, let's not take the Texans lightly. They're not the same like bend over slouch that we expected them to be heading into the latter part of the season. And on their side, I mean, Royce Freeman's their RB1. So, he's their RB1 and Brandon Cooks is their wide receiver 1. So if you're wanting to start guys who are the number ones at their position for the Houston Texans, then by all means, go for it. It's not the worst matchup. And, it's really not with Jacksonville on the other side. And the thing is, Tennessee, again, the Houston Texans have had the Jags' number. So, if you believe in that weird Fugazi, random shit, then, there's a reason. What's the reason why Houston continues to beat the Jags? So if you're on that train, then maybe Freeman and Cooks. But again, it's the finals. Those aren't the guys that you want to deploy in hopes to bring home the trophy. So for me, it's a big Jags day, starting Lawrence, ETN, probably Evan Ingram, Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, flip a coin. On the Tennessee side, on the Houston side, they have been playing and fighting hard, but for your fantasy finals, I just don't think anybody really bodes much value.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's crazy. Last 9 games. But I think the Jaguars are a different team than they were, last 3 seasons, I guess, of that. So, I think the Jaguars still come up with a win. But that is an interesting
Yeah,
thing to
let's
consider.
hope. We'll see. Yeah.
All right, 49ers at Las Vegas to face the Raiders. The 49ers are favored by 9 points. Over under in that game is 42.5. On the 49ers side, we talked about Purdy. I think he's a borderline start. He's probably like quarterback 11 as far as fantasy goes and projections. So he's not going to be a guy that you start unless you absolutely have no other options. And outside of Purdy, CMC against a team that is 32nd in DVOA against the receiving running backs. So CMC is a full send, has a very favorable matchup against the Raiders. And next we have got Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk, I think, is a start this week against the Raiders defense. He's on my fantasy team, and he's going to be a guy that I'm starting in lieu of Watson being injured. And then George Kittle, tight end number 3 in fantasy. I mean, who would have thought, right? You have him, you start him. That's all it boils down to. If you've gotten this far with Kittle not being able to produce, and he just produced in playoffs, and you keep riding that, and you start George Kittle. On the Raiders side,
he's got a pretty good connection with his quarterback, right? So you kind of have to start.
He does have a pretty good connection, absolutely. On the Raiders side, Josh Jacobs, he is dependent on, I think, Stidham's performance. I think if Stidham is able to convert on third downs, get them into scoring territory so that Josh Jacobs can find a way into the end zone, then he's going to have a decent day. But if Joe Stidham just has a terrible performance against a difficult 49ers defense, then that's going to be tough for Josh Jacobs owners. But you're still going to start him. Devontae Adams, I've seen that he's wide receiver 6 in fantasy. He's in the same category as Hopkins, who downgrades when you don't have your number one your quarterback playing for you, which we'll get into. He's a low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2. You're probably still going to start him in hopes that Stidham can connect with Devontae Adams. And Darren Waller, since returning, he's finished as tight end 8 and tight end 12 in fantasy. And given the low depth and tight end position that we've talked about on and on again, you're probably going to still start Waller. But the biggest thing in this game to look for is that Derek Carr is not starting. Garrett Stidham is going to get the start for this game. And my guess is that because Derek Carr isn't starting, this is it for Derek Carr. Like, he is not going to play another snap in Las Vegas. The fact that I mean, I can't see, he's not that great to say, okay, like let's just say he's injured. It's not even an injury designation. It's none of that. He's just not playing well. And so I think that this is it for Derek Carr. But 49ers are obviously the better team. With Purdy, they've been doing really well. So I expect them to win a game. I'll be very, very surprised if they are able to defeat the 49ers. And I think that 49ers do cover the spread of 9 points against the Raiders.
Yeah, the Raiders, just stop me if you've heard this before. They're in shambles. They lose head coaches midseason. They lose receivers midseason. They have a quarterback, supposedly a quarterback that just got paid a shit ton of money and got an extension. Awesome. My fucking light went out again. Just got paid an extension. And, 2 games before before the end of the season, he's sent home because they don't want him to be a distraction to the team. And that's like one of the weirdest designations ever from a guy who's supposed to be so like leaderish and team minded and I love my team, all this stuff. So I don't know, it's a weird dynamic there, but I agree with you. I think his time in Vegas is done. Whatever quarterback or whatever team gets him, that's maybe like the Jets or a team that's a quarterback away with a great defense. I still think he can be a good enough quarterback in the right system. I think the Raiders are just always in shambles.
Yeah.
There's always controversy. There's always shit going on with them. So I'll be interested to see where he heads into this offseason.
Yeah, and one thing to note in the 49ers side, there we talked about their good defense. One of the positions that they are actually not very good at is the slot cornerback position. Whoever has to guard the slot receiver. So if the Raiders are smart, they're gonna put Devontae Adams in slot to try to feed him and attack that cornerback. That's allowing like something around 90 QBR whenever he's being targeted. But my fear is that Hunter Renfro is going to play the slot, and he's going to be the guy that's getting all those easy
Yeah.
targets. But if I think they're smart, they would put Devontae Adams there. So look out for that. See if they actually do put Devontae Adams in the slot more often.
All right, let's go to Seattle, where the Seahawks are hosting the New York Jets. Jets come into this one as 2-point road favorites over under 42.5. It is the return of Mike White. He is officially back as a starting quarterback. Yeah, hallelujah for everybody. NFL fans, Jets fans, quarterback fans, females, I guess, because Zach Wilson is just such a playboy. I don't know. But yeah, everybody's rooting for Mike White. I think everybody in the world wants Mike White as a quarterback over Zach Wilson. Both teams are still in the hunt. They're both barely in the hunt. Seattle defense has been so bad. They've been a great matchup for opposing fantasy players, basically at every fantasy position. So to me, I'm looking at the Jets side, and with Mike White back, Zonovan Knight, man, he'd been so good. And then he tapered off a little bit with Wilson back. They had a couple of tough matchups against the run, but this is a great matchup for Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight in the finals. What better player to win it all for you than Bam? And then Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's had a great connection with Mike White when he's been in. He's clearly talented enough. He's clearly a wide receiver one. It's just a matter of can the quarterback get him the football? And Mike White's been able to do that. So I love Garrett Wilson in this matchup as well. Even though they have Tariq Woolen, the Seahawks still surrender a lot of points and a lot of yards, and their defense is sus. So I like Garrett Wilson. And Tyler Conklin, man, again, tight ends, flip a coin. If you're in the finals, hopefully you have a stable tight end and it doesn't come to Tyler Conklin, but it's not the worst matchup in the world against Seattle. On the Seahawks side, I mean, they're trying to win and get into the playoffs. So Geno Smith, who's been nice all year, it's a tough matchup for him, but I think if you're in the finals with Geno, you're probably going to ride him. Ken Walker is going to play. He's been good. You're going to play him. DK Metcalf, again, same situation. He's been great. So you have to play him. Sauce Gardner's there. I get it. It probably makes you want to, look elsewhere or bench him or something. But, DK is one of those physical freaks that, he could get locked up, but he could also get one, mossing touchdown, or he could burn you for like a 50-yard bomb. So, I get the Sauce matchup. I do. And I get the want to start or to bench him and pivot elsewhere, but I just don't think it's worth it if he goes off and is on your bench. And especially because Tyler Lockett, he'd been hurt. He looks like he's going to play, but anytime Lockett's hurt and he's been on the injury report for 3 days in a row, like heading into Friday, he's still on the injury report. He was limited. I still think there's a chance that he plays, but he's limited. And that means DK is going to have to step up. So the target share is definitely going to be there for DK. Again, it's a must-win situation for the Seahawks if they want to stay alive in the playoffs. So I think on the Seahawks side, not as great matchup, but you're still going to deploy the big three. On the Jets side, I mean, even Mike White has been startable, and the Seahawks defense is bad. So Mike White, Bam Knight, wow, that rhymes. Mike White, Bam Knight, and Garrett Wilson, all three of those guys, I feel pretty confident starting.
Man, the Seahawks are dealing with some major injuries, right? So Tyler Lockett injured,
Yep.
Marcus Goodwin, Noah Fant
Yep.
is injured as well.
Yep.
So it makes me want to look at Laquan Treadwell, maybe,
No,
but
never
I
do
think
that. Never do that to yourself. Just never. The minute you have to say the words Laquan Treadwell and that relates to fantasy football, not even just football in general, fantasy football, then you're in too deep. You've dug yourself into a grave or a hole that you need to get the fuck out of because no, I don't care if he goes off for 2 touchdowns and 200 yards this game, show it. Never in the history of fantasy football start Laquan Treadwell in the fantasy finals. Just don't do it. Just don't do it to
Yeah.
yourself.
I think you're right. I think I'm out of that hole. I will
I
shy
got you
away
out,
from
man.
the
I got you
contrary.
out.
I
What are
appreciate
friends
that.
for?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. All right. Next up, we've got your Minnesota Vikings traveling to Lambeau Field to play the Green Bay Packers. Vegas hates the Vikings, man. Green Bay
Yeah.
is favored by 3 points. The over-under is at 47.5 points. So let's start with the Packers. Aaron Rodgers, I think, is not a terrible start because of a matchup against the Vikings, who allow the 27th, who are 27th in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. But Rodgers hasn't had a great weeks either. So that, I don't like Aaron Rodgers as a start. I think that I put him over Brock Purdy if you have to start Brock Purdy. But even though he's in a favorable matchup, I would also look elsewhere in that. Aaron Jones, I think he said that he is starting, even though he was limited in practice. I had notes on here. AJ Dillon RB1 if Aaron Jones is out, but given that Aaron Jones will be starting, I think it's going to be a split carry between Dillon and Jones. So I'm a little concerned to deploy any one of those guys. I think if you have to, Jones is the guy that you go with, but I could see that if he aggravates, his I think it's an ankle injury, Dillon could definitely have a great performance as well. Watson was limited in practice, so guys like Alan Lazard will need to step up. Romeo Doubs is a flex play as well if Watson's out, given that the Vikings are susceptible to the passing game of opposing offenses. So either Lazard or Dobbs. I think I like Lazard more. I know Dobbs had really good games, but he was kind of like a guy that Rodgers would go deep with. Lazard's more, I think, of a volume guy if Watson's out. So for that reason, I like Lazard, but I don't think you can go wrong with starting any one of those guys if you need to. On the Viking side, Kirk Cousins, he is a quarterback one. He finished as quarterback. He's going to start on your team. He finished as QB5, QB3, and QB6 in each of the last 3 weeks. So you're going to still go with the hot hand and Cousins, and hopefully he's there on your team and you can start him. And then Cook, he is the running back. You're going to start him at RB1 this week on your team. He's going against the 23rd and he's going against an opposing team that's 23rd in fantasy points per game allowed to running backs. And as usual, Justin Jefferson, start him. That's all I got to say. Hawkinson, he has a target share of 22.4% as a Viking. So he's also a guy for the fact that he is getting the targets. You're still going to start him in the tight end position. He finished as tight end 1 last week, so Hawkinson is definitely a send. But yeah, I think that the Vegas is just being unfavorable to the Vikings, and the Vikings are 11-0 with when it's a 1-point game. There's something about this team, one score game. There's something about this team that they find ways to win, and even though the Packers are kind of coming off of back-to-back wins and all of that, I just think that given that Watson is out, Aaron Jones being hobbled, I think that the Vikings are in a really nice matchup against this terrible Packers defense, and they should win this game. I'm going Vikings +3 on this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the Packers have been so susceptible to run, right? So if Dalvin Cook can run the football, then that makes the Vikings borderline unstoppable, because the minute Dalvin Cook can run and they start to try to stop the run, you have Justin Jefferson. So it's all going to be dependent on that. But the Vikings defense, like we said, they're so susceptible to just about everything. So if the Packers come out hot and they go up, it could be a different story, but we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see. And I kind of like it to be this way. I want the Vikings to just continue to get no respect from anybody, continue to be frauds, and then just continue to win football games. Because that's the best thing for me as a fan, is the expectations remain low, because the national media has made these expectations or perception that this team isn't good. They're fraudulent, right? But they continue to win. So I'm always just pleasantly surprised. So it's the best place to be in. The LA Chargers, who have already clinched a playoff spot, are hosting the Los Angeles Rams, who are already eliminated from the playoffs. Chargers 6.5-point favorites, over under 42.5. Again, Chargers have already clinched. They clinched last week, but they are going to play just about everyone. How much they play everyone, what they do, what the strategy in that sense is, I have no idea. Let's talk about Justin Herbert, man. Justin Herbert's been pretty disappointing for fantasy. He's had one 20-plus point game in the last 11 games. Based on where you drafted him, based on what your expectations were from Justin Herbert, that is absolutely not the output that you expected. So here's a fantasy championships. If somehow your team was Justin Herbert led and you made the finals, you should definitely probably, in my opinion, pivot elsewhere. I think, Jared Goff has a great matchup. He's got the best matchup on the board probably this week, like you mentioned. I even like guys like Daniel Jones. Like, you could even deploy Gardner Minshew in a worse matchup. But it just seems like this team just runs the football a lot. Herbert loves to dump the ball off. His air yards per throw are so low. It's just the way this offense functions. It doesn't benefit Herbert, fantasy wise at all. And so they don't have that deep threat. Like Mike Williams has been hit or miss, and Keenan Allen's reliable, but he's not a deep threat, right? So he's just catching like third downs and converting, and then they just go right back to Eckler. So he hasn't been great. And so personally, if you're in the finals with Herbert, I would look elsewhere if there is a favorable matchup like Jared Goff. Austin Eckler, obviously, he said he's going to play. The guy gives a shit about fantasy football, so you just play him. And then you look at, Keenan Allen. Obviously, he's getting the volume, so there's no reason to bench him right now. The target share is ridiculous. So you play him. You don't play Mike Williams. Again, he could boom for you, but are you really banking on a boom in the finals unless you're down 50 or something and you're on a prayer? Probably not. On the Rams side, we're in a weird simulation world where I feel great if you're starting Cam Akers or Tyler Higbee. And I never thought I'd ever be here, but I mean, the results kind of speak for themselves, and the Chargers defense isn't that great, and they've already clinched. Joey Bosa is expected to play, but why the hell are they going to full send Joey Bosa after they've already clinched the playoffs, right? So it's more like, okay, they're probably going to try to get him warm, get him loose, but he's not going to play the whole game, and the Chargers defense has already been bad. So if they're playing for nothing, they're already been bad. Like, the Rams are basically playing for more than the Chargers in this game. The Chargers are just getting ready for the playoffs. So Cam Akers, Tyler Higbee, deploy them in your finals with confidence. And I think they're going to, contribute. And we're going to look back in a couple seasons and be like, yeah, Akers and Higbee, those were the fantasy winners that year. Just wild stuff.
That is crazy. Given all the ups and downs that Akers has had this year, man, the team doesn't want him, and now he's gonna
I
potentially win
know.
a fantasy
It's crazy.
year. Yeah, it's wild. All right, that takes us to Sunday Night Football, where the Baltimore Ravens are hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. Baltimore is favored by 2.5 points. Over under is at 35. The Steelers, the guys you're going to start or consider starting, Najee Harris is a guy that has been playing really well the past 5 games. And although he has a very tough matchup against the Baltimore run defense, and I was kind of thinking through this, like if I had Najee Harrison, Stevenson, and Zonovan Knight, I would be inclined to bench Najee Harris. I think that the matchup is I think he's got to get into the end zone for you to be able to come out of that game, with solid fantasy points. But I just don't see the carries, happening for like 100 plus carries. I don't see that happening for Najee Harris against the Ravens. Deontay Johnson, he's hard to trust, but for a flex spot, but that's a guy that he hasn't gotten to the end zone at this point. He probably won't. It seems like George Pickens is the guy that they're going to target, or even Freiermuth. Freiermuth is a guy, when Pickett is playing as a quarterback, Freiermuth is a great tight end start, and so is George Pickens in a flex spot. Deontay Johnson, although he gets you the volume, I just don't see him. So I see better options, and I think George Pickens is a better option than Deontay Johnson at this point. The Baltimore has allowed the highest deep completion rate and the fourth most deep passing yards in the NFL. All of that bodes really well for George Pickens. On the Ravens side, Lamar Jackson is ruled out, so he's not going to play. The guys you're going to start, J.K. Dobbins, you're going to start him, although it's, again, a tough matchup against the rush defense for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have been stepping up. You saw what they did against the Carolina Panthers, and they may just do that against the Ravens running backs, Gus Edwards and Dobbins. So I think you would still start Dobbins, but you got to temper your expectations there. Mark Andrews has a 29.5 target share, 6 target, which it's all basically around 6 targets a game, 25.9 air yard share, and 1.33 yards per route run. All of that to result in nothing for you on fantasy side, but you've got to keep rolling with Andrews. I mean, I don't know that I think
Uh,
these are
you have
your
to. I mean,
yeah,
it's like it's like they're throwing 7 times and like 2.5 of them are going to Andrews. Yeah, I
right.
get that they're only throwing 7 times, but he's so important that 2.5 of them go to him. So it's like shit. Like it's volume, but like target share. So I mean, shit. And where you drafted Mark Andrews, if somehow again you're in the finals, you kind of have to start him. You kind of
Yeah.
just because again, there's no surefire option, because tight end's a crapshoot. Like if it's running back and like we've talked about, like great players like Justin Herbert that you can pivot from because there are quarterbacks, there are streamable options that have a floor, that have a baseline. But with the tight end position, you could start a guy and he could literally put up a goose egg. So, yeah, I think with Mark Andrews, you're right. You just have to start him.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of this game, yeah, like Baltimore is favored by 2.5 points, but I think that with no Lamar Jackson, the fact that that line is still 2.5, I think it's a little bit ridiculous. I think the Steelers' defense is good enough for them to keep them in the games, and I think that the Pickett to Pickens connection, even Deontay Johnson, they have enough firepower in the offense to come out with the win. And I trust Mike Tomlin. I think the Steelers cover that plus 2.5 spread, and they should beat the Baltimore Ravens to get them that much closer to the playoffs, which is far, but it's still there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think obviously not having Jackson helps the Steelers. The Steelers are motivated. They're still on the out. They're still not out of the playoffs. Mike Tomlin's still chasing that. It's there's a lot to play for here. And the Ravens' offense has been so lackluster that they just keep the opposing teams in games. Right? They're barely beating teams, but their defense has been the team that's stepping up. So yeah, one score game the entire game. You're giving your team a chance. I still like the Steelers in this matchup as well. Let's end the rundown with Monday Night Football, arguably the game of the week or the game of the year. The Bills and the Bengals in Cincinnati. Buffalo on the road, favored by 1, over under 49.5. This is, like I said, game of the week, game of the year, possible future AFC Championship matchup if, unless Patrick Mahomes has something to say about it. The Bengals have been the hottest team in football right now. They're the hotter team of these two. They've been great defensively, and Joe Burrow is Joe Burrow. So, this matchup has all of the makings of that Bills Chiefs game in the playoffs recently, that where great defenses coming in, but the offenses are just too good. They're just too good, and it's just a matter of who's going to score more. So there is a shootout possibility here, which, again, a lot of fantasy guys in this matchup are probably, players that got you into the finals. Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase. So there's big players in this matchup on Monday Night Football for the championship. And, you're going to start them all. It's one of those matchups where you're going to start them all. Don't overthink it. Josh Allen, start. Stephon Diggs, start. In this game, if you're having to start between Singletary or Cook, I lean Singletary. Dawson Knox is not a bad play at all. I think Dawson Knox, you can feel comfortable starting him. Again, there's going to be points to be had. Throws are going to be made. Joe Burrow, you start. Joe Mixon, you start. Jamar Chase, you start. T. Higgins, you start. Hayden Hurst, I think, actually practiced, so he may play. I think that's pushing it just because he's coming back from injury. But wouldn't be surprised if he gets in the end zone because, like I said, I think this has the makings of a really, really big shootout game. It could let me down. We could see the defenses step up and we could see our fair share of field goals too. But I think the ball will still be moving between the 20s. So I think the yards, receptions, things like that for your fantasy players should still come. So, I have no idea, to be honest with you. If I had to lean Cincinnati at home with how hot they are, yeah, dude, I don't know. Give me Cincinnati right now, which is crazy because Buffalo is so good. And, they were kind of my AFC pick at the beginning of the season. But the way the Bengals are playing right now, teams are having a hard time beating them. I mean, just look at what they did to the Chiefs a couple weeks back.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with you, but I still am gonna go with the team. That's so tough. I'm gonna go with Buffalo here, just because Buffalo just. I think that they'll find a way to win this game, no matter what. I think Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and that team's just too scary. But yeah, the Bengals are good too, so it is tough. Flip a coin and figure out who and go with that team, I guess.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great way to end Week 17, Monday Night Football. It's a primetime showdown. Let's hope it lives up to the hype because, again, the hype is already building so much. First time Allen and Burrow have faced each other, so that'll be fun spectacle to watch as well. That is it for the rundown show of it. Let's end the episode with giving out our personal matchups of the week. I'll kick us off. My matchup of the week is going to be Brian Robinson Jr., running back for the Commanders. He's facing the Cleveland Browns rushing defense, 30th against opposing fantasy running backs this year. Antonio Gibson is officially ruled out. Washington has not been eliminated from the playoffs yet. And what do? They feed him the ball. They have Carson Wentz back, so it's not necessarily the aired out Heineke show. So I think they are going to do their best to control this game, run the football. And Brian Robinson, I mean, shit, don't be surprised if this dude gets 30 carries this game. So I think he's going to see a lot of touches. And with no Gibson out, they're going to have to use Robinson in some third down situations as well. So dump offs, things like that. He's going to be on the field a lot more. So Brian Robinson is going to be my matchup of the week. He has a good chance to win fantasy football championships for you.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good matchup for Brian Robinson. My matchup of the week is going to be Justin Fields against the Detroit Lions. Detroit's defense has been good, but they can still be torched through the air. Since week 11, they've been 30th in pass defense DVOA, 28th in success rate per dropback, and 38th in EPA per dropback. And most importantly, 31st in fantasy points per game allowed to quarterbacks. And if you go back to November, when Justin Fields played against Detroit, Justin Fields had 4 total touchdowns, 2 from the ground game, 2 throwing the ball to Cole Kmet. So I like Justin Fields in the fantasy finals this week. Great matchup against the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a divisional matchup. Detroit's playing for something, so they're probably going to put up points against Chicago. So the Chicago's going to have to try to put up points and keep up. Fields using his legs all day, man. Fantasy stud. That is it, Shove It. That is the episode. Thank you guys so much for sticking through it with my nasally ass voice. Again, big week. Hope your team wins that championship. They lock things in. Shove It. Hope you get that championship in your league. I hope I get my championship in my league. But for me, it won't be determined at the end of this week because it's a stupid ass 2-week matchup, which might actually work in my favor because I don't have Hurts, Pollard, or Henry this week. So, Henry's going to play next week in that win or go in game. Dallas is still fighting. If the Eagles lose this week, Dallas is going to be fighting for that number 1 spot next week. So Pollard will probably play. And if Eagles lose, they're going to want to secure that first spot. So Hurts may play. So it might actually end up working out for me. I just can't go down too big this week. But again, best of luck to everybody in their fantasy football championships. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're the Only Playbook. I'm Steve Carr. That's Show It. Have a great weekend, guys. Happy New Year.